went to sit in my boss's office, and I looked fairly calm on the outside, but inside I was just bubbling with anxiety. And in the course of the meeting, I started posting on Post-it notes and sticking these notes on his wall, all of the things that were stressing me out and all of these various responsibilities that were just burying me at this point in life, and started listing those things. It was a big wall, and I had it pretty filled. I was leading a weekly worship service every week and all the details of that, and preaching in that worship service every week. I was helping and serving in 3 other services per week. I was running an international outreach program with multiple partnerships that required traveling around the world at various points to support those partnerships. I was making networks and community development projects within the city that I was working. I was mentoring half a dozen college students every week and an elementary school student, overseeing half a dozen staff personally and making sure their outreach projects were going well. I was a new dad trying to figure out how to do the life as a new dad with not any family in the area to support and help in a critical time of need because they just weren't close. And I was also trying to figure out how to be a new homeowner and keep my house in order, and then slip in a few things like sleep, the occasional eating and exercise. I was running a martial arts program every week. And so half this wall is filled up with stuff, and I just stood back and said, okay, can you help me figure out how to do life right now? And then as we sat there looking at the wall, it was like divine irony. The sticky notes just started falling off one by one. They lost their stickiness. And one would float to the ground, then another one would float to the ground. It's as if the wall was telling me, hey, you're too busy. You got to focus your life. In the quiet times of that season, when I heard the Lord, one of the things that he said to me was, Jarod, your life has become centered around getting all of these things done, and I'm swirling somewhere around the periphery. When Jesus talked to Martha in that passage that you just heard, he said, you're worried and upset. That was a good description of me. I wonder if he would spend a day with you, if Jesus would say to you something similar these days. Would he say, you know, I've shadowed you for 24 hours and I couldn't help but notice your life is filled with anxiety and you're really upset about a lot of different things. Would he say that to you? And what's even more curious is I wonder if you would be able to hear him, because for some of us, that's the only life we know. There is not even a glimmer of an image of a life that is not filled with worry, distraction, and care and upsetness about all kinds of things. What other way is there to live? Let's do a little self-test. Can you find a pencil or pen? Something to write on the back of your worship folder or something? We're not going to publicize this or post it. You don't have to share it, so you can be honest. I'm going to list out some things, and if you have felt anxiety or you've been upset about those things in the last 30 days, I just want you to put a check mark for each one that counts for you, okay? Now, we're not talking about whether you have done those things, talked about them, even worked on them, been concerned about them. That doesn't count. We're talking about if you have felt anxious or upset or disturbed about any of these things in the last 30 days, and put a check mark, okay? Let's start with money. If you've been anxious or upset about your financial reality in any way or worried about what's going to happen, how about retirement? Put a check mark if you've been anxious or upset about that. Let's do a test at school. Some of you are like, whew, I don't have to mark that one. I'm not in school. Okay, at least one down. I'm not going to have 100% anxiety on this one. How about your health? Your medical condition. How about somebody else's health? How about health care in general? How about anything related to politics? Don't laugh, you're giving yourself away. This can be confidential if you want it to be. How about any moral decline of our country? How about a car repair? How about any unexpected major repair, house or otherwise? How about conflict at your job? Conflict with a friend or family member? How about death? Your death. How about somebody else's death? How about food? Your diet? How about your weight? How about the appearance of your hair? I tell you, last weekend I gave every single member of my family a haircut. I was anxious about that one, including myself. How about spending time with God? You've been anxious or worried or upset about whether you're doing that enough. How about guilt over something you said that you wish you could take back? How about international affairs, wars, or some sort of relationship going on? How about being fired, demoted, or written up at work? How about being on time? If you had any anxiety about being late, how about being overbooked? One more. What's one more? I'm out of ideas. Family. Ah, that's a great one. So do a quick count. We're not going to share this. But the point is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times 4, 24. You can average out where you are. Those are just some options. The point is for us to maybe get a glimpse into the fact that this story is extremely pertinent to our society. 1 out of 5 American adults is clinically diagnosed with anxiety disorder. It's the most common mental illness out there. And don't misunderstand me. I'm not anti-medicine. I'm just saying we worry about a lot of stuff. 2/3 of employees at their workplace say that at least half of the time or more, they have to work under tight deadlines with stressful, high-pressure situations. That's no shock to you, is it, if you work somewhere? I'm interested in some of the developments that have recently increased our anxiety as a society. One of those is the development of the smartphone. While there's tons of obvious pros, there are some cons. One of the pros is actually when we get dinged or something hits our phone and it messages us, it releases a little bit of dopamine in our brain. It's a little bit of an upper because we feel connection, we feel wanted, we feel like something's happening, there's a bit of news. But one of the downsides is that it's actually, studies have shown, decreased our relational connectivity and increased our social anxiety. The average millennial checks their phone, guess how many times a day? No, 10,000. 150 times a day. That's every 6 minutes they're awake, checking their phone. And don't look down on millennials. Older generations are barely behind, not much. What's increased is the fact that now you can be having dinner at the dinner table at home and work can find you in your pocket. Work can come to you on the beach. Somebody who has a difficulty or a conflict with you can tell you so while you're sleeping and the screen lights up in the darkness and you just can't resist. And it's actually increased our ability to be anxious and worried about many, many things. So this gem of a passage in Luke chapter 10 may actually be a treasure chest of wisdom for us. What I'd like to do is I'd like to read through this passage slowly once so you can hear it again and look at it. And then I want to read through it again slowly and highlight a few important aspects that might be helpful to know. So can you look at this with me? Let's go through it one more time. Actually, 2 more times. This is from Luke chapter 10. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into their home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner that she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me." But the Lord said to her, "My dear Martha, you're worried and upset over all these details. There's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary's discovered it, and it will not be taken from her. Now I want to read it again. This is such a short little section, but so perfectly worded and so rich. As Jesus and the disciples, his disciples, what does a disciple mean? It means learner. It means student. These are the people that were shadowing Jesus' life so they could become more like him. As Jesus and his disciples were moving, and take note, Mary invited probably all of them over for dinner, so there was a large group. That adds a lot of stress. You ever had 13 people show up for dinner and you weren't expecting them? They continued on their way to Jerusalem. Why were they going to Jerusalem? It's actually really important to know. Just a chapter before, Luke, as he's telling the story of Jesus, he makes this drastic turn and he says, Jesus realized his time on earth was coming to an end, so he fixed his focus on Jerusalem where he knew he was going to go and die on a cross. So for the rest of Luke, it marches towards Jerusalem as Jesus approaches his death. Have you ever been with somebody who knows they are getting close to their death? They're approaching the end. Their days are numbered. They know it. There's a certain serenity and a certain solemnness about those days with someone like that. Jesus focuses in on the most important things. You don't take your to-do list and add a bunch of stuff to it when you know your days are numbered. You focus on the people that you love, and you want to be with them and soak up every minute. They're on their way to Jerusalem. They came to a certain village, Bethany, a few miles outside of Jerusalem, where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. This was her choice, keep in mind, so her stress is not imposed. She welcomed them on her own volition. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet. What does sitting at the Lord's feet mean? That's kind of code for like what a disciple would do or what a student would do or what a learner would do. You're in a seated position as if this was your teacher and you were the student and you're learning from them humbly. She sat at the Lord's feet listening to him. But Martha, she was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. Now, everybody would have expected her to prepare dinner. Jesus would have expected. Hospitality custom said, if you invite people over to your home, especially people of importance, you make the best meal that you can make. And she had a lot of people of importance over her house, so she was preparing. She came to the Lord and said, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here? She's doing nothing. What an insult to Jesus. While I do all the work. Tell her to come here. She wasn't going to call Mary out herself, but she told Jesus to get Mary moving and help. But the Lord said to her, my dear Martha, not my idiot Martha, not my, oh, here you go again, Martha. My dear Martha. You're worried and upset. Those two words capture a full circle of where she was at in her mind. You are anxious and disturbed about so many details. You're chasing bats in the air, trying to catch them all with anxiety. There's only one thing worth being concerned about. Some translations say there's only one thing needed, one thing necessary, one thing essential for life. Remember, Jesus said before, people don't live on bread alone. In other words, our sustenance, our life source is not just on what we eat from the kitchen, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of whom? God. There's only one thing. Mary's discovered it. I'm not going to take it away. If we could glean some things from this passage, I think the first thing that we could glean from it is that the one thing for us is our relationship with Jesus. This is the one thing that matters. It's the one thing that's necessary in a sea of to-do lists. Martha probably started feeling the stress, especially if she didn't have all the stuff that she needed for the meal. Have you ever been starting to cook and you realize, oh, I forgot to pick up butter, whatever it is. We don't have any salt. if anything was going wrong, she probably got more stressed. And then she could realize, oh my goodness, there are really a lot of guys, and these guys look hungry. They've been walking. I'm not sure if I'm making enough. And then she's trying to put it all together herself. And here's sister sitting there who usually is a wingman in the kitchen, and she's doing nothing. And you can imagine at first her beginning to grunt a little bit and look sweaty and try to get Mary's attention over in the kitchen, and it not working. And then she just all out resorts to just going to her and saying, come on. This is not fair. I am over here doing all this stuff, and you're just sitting around doing nothing. And what's interesting is what Jesus doesn't do. Jesus does not wiggle his nose and I dream of Jeannie and just make a meal supernaturally. He could have. He could have alleviated her stress and fed them. What's interesting is that Jesus did not give Martha a 5-minute coaching session on the 1-minute manager principle and how to get things done and make it all work, and recommend a new productivity app for her and how she can better organize her shopping list so that when people come over, you can be prepared for this next. He doesn't do any of that. What's interesting is Jesus doesn't even reprimand her for her frantic pace and her distracted mind. What Jesus does is he just simply draws a contrast of two people. Now, these are represented by two real people, but what he's doing is he's representing two kinds of people in this story. He says, Martha, here's you. Your mind is racing a mile a minute. You're not present. You haven't been with us since we came. You're worried and distracted. You're upset about your reputation because it's on the line if you don't make a good dinner. You're trying to impress us, and you're frenetic. You're stressing everybody in the house out. You're anxious and upset about tons of stuff. And then there's Mary, who's actually locked on to what's most important. What's interesting about this is when you and I get stressed, have you ever had just more to do than you think you can get done? Anybody else? What's interesting too is this is not just folks at a certain age. I mean, I talk to retired people and all I hear is, I'm busier now than when I've ever been. I'm like, how can you be busier now when you're retired than you've ever been? But it's true for some of you, isn't it? Some of you it's not. And you're thinking, I don't know who those people are, but I just don't want that. It doesn't matter what stage of life you're in. There are times at school, there are times at work, there are times at home, there are times after you're done working where you just are overwhelmed, upset, anxious about so many things. And what we try to do is tackle it all and get it done. Then we can rest, then we can have peace of mind once the list is checked off and everything is done. Jesus offers a very different kind of approach. It's so simple. When things get more complex for us, what we tend to do is create complex solutions to deal with the complex problems. Technology advances, we've got to keep things managed, we've got to learn new software, we've got to manage how many passwords we have to sign into 100 different things, where do you even keep those things? And so we develop complex solutions to address complex problems. This is a different approach, and Jesus just says, listen, if you could sit for a minute and remember where your life source comes from, there's one thing that really matters at the end of the day. I'm going to die, folks. And the meal's going to be nice, but I'd rather have you. Because life is too short to worry about all this stuff. If we can stop and be with Jesus, it's not the only step, but it's the first step. Things begin to clear up. Second thing we can glean from this story is that there is a holy harmony between being and doing. There's a holy harmony between being and doing. You might be tempted to read through this story. Maybe you've read it before. Maybe you're hearing it for the first time. But as you read through it, you think, okay, great. That means I need to not be so busy. I guess what this passage is telling me is to chill out and to start spending a lot more time in prayer. And then your next step is immediately going toward, okay, how do I really actually change my life at all? Because I can't ditch off my parenting responsibilities. I have stress at work that I can't fix. It's not coming from me. I just have to deal with it. I've got stress with my health. I've really got all these issues and all these situations that I'm responsible for. I can't just shove off the details. So how am I actually supposed to do all of this sitting and being with Jesus all the time kind of stuff? The good news is this is not a story about being with Jesus versus doing things for Jesus. This is not the comparison that we're fighting against. In other words, it's not more godly to be a monk than it is to be a mom. It's not more godly to be a pastor than it is to be a postal worker. This is not a fight against being with Jesus versus doing for Jesus. Here's the reason that I can make the case for you. If you flip back a couple stories before this one in Luke 10, you see a story where somebody comes to Jesus and says, hey, what's the most important commandment? He says, love the Lord and love people. Everything about life kind of boils down to these two directions, love God and love people. And then the very next story he tells, anybody know what it is? Well, how do we know who my neighbor is? He tells the story of a Good Samaritan. And this guy is beaten up, robbed in the story. He's telling a parable. It's not a live story. It's a made-up story. The guy is beaten up, lying at the side of the road, and here comes a bunch of people that just pass by him and don't help. Some of them are going to church to spend time with God. But the most unlikely of the characters, the Samaritan, the racial tension enemy, comes over and helps. And what does he do to help the person? What does he do to show love to someone else? Gives him medical care, gives him a place to stay, pays for his meals. It's all practical, service-oriented stuff. It's hands-on, service-oriented help. This is Martha's kind of thing. And Jesus applauds this person for showing love through acts of service. Have you ever heard of the book, The 5 Love Languages? Basic idea of the book is that each of us are wired to show and receive love in different ways. It's a really interesting concept. So some people, they express love through words. They're really good at saying things that make people feel loved. Man, that shirt looks nice on you. Or, wow, what a great job you did singing yesterday. Or, that's top-notch work right there. And through their words, they just build this love, and that's the way they receive love too. Some people share and express love through quality time together. They want to be with you. They just want to be together. It doesn't even matter what you're doing, just being around each other. Man, that quality time means love. Some people express love through acts of service. They want to do something for you. Or if you do something for them, wow, you must really care. They don't want to sit around and hold hands and tell each other how much we love each other. They're like, man, I'll change your oil. Wow, you must really care about me, because that's an act of service. I'll sweep the floor for you when it's your day to do it. That's real love. Some people express love through gifts. They'll give you something, and that will say, wow, you must really love. You thought of me. You thought through this gift. This is not mine. It's not my love language. It's one of the lowest of mine, which gets me in trouble every Christmas, birthday, and anniversary, because it's my wife's top one. Some people express love through physical touch. So this is easy for us to misread a story like this and say, well, Jesus obviously favors people whose love language is words and quality time, because that's what Mary was doing. And he doesn't like people who are the acts of service and gifts-oriented type of people who do things busily, hands-on. That's not the point of the story. In fact, Jesus expressed love in every one of those love languages, didn't he? He touched people who were estranged, made them well. He spoke words that encouraged and affirmed people. He spent quality time with his closest friends and disciples and loved ones. He did incredible acts of service when people were shocked that he did it. He gave great gifts of God from heaven. He expressed every one of these. He's not drawing a contrast, so if you're one of those hands-on busy types, likes to do stuff for people, likes to cook meals, this is not a slam against you, and it's not to lift up those who are quality time. What it's to say is, whatever you do, it has to be from the same heart. Because let's be honest, you can do a bunch of stuff for God and hardly think of God. Your heart's not even there. You're just distracted, right? Or you can do things for God with a heart full of love for God. You can sit down, read your Bible, and pray for an hour with a heart that's focused on God and connecting in relationship with your one thing. Or you can do it as a checklist and not ever connect with God at all. The heart of the issue is the heart of the person. Joanna Weaver wrote a book called Having a Mary Heart in a Martha World. She wrote a lot about this passage. I want to read you one of her commentaries on this particular section. She said, "What stood out most to me was the fact that when Jesus scolded Martha about her busyness, he wasn't condemning her efficiency or hard work or her can-do personality. He wasn't telling her she had to be just like Mary to please him. Jesus simply didn't want Martha to be so caught up in kitchen service for him that she missed out on the joy of living room intimacy with him." The third thing we can glean from this, and the last one, the first one was that our one thing is Jesus. Our relationship with Jesus is the one thing, the source of our life, the center. The second thing is that there's a holy harmony between being and doing. These two actually work together, being and doing for and with Jesus. And the third one is, this isn't much of an insight as maybe it is a warning. Marthas will try to recruit you into their chaos. The first obstacle you have, if you want to try to live for a one thing focused life that's centered on Jesus and marked by peace and love and joy and the Holy Spirit, your first obstacle is going to be you. How do I actually center and bring it back into balance and let some of these distractions be cares that I give to Christ? Your first obstacle is going to be you. Then, real quickly, your second obstacle is going to be everybody else. Because most people don't live like that. Try it. Spend an hour with God, alone, in quiet, and read or pray or journal or walk in nature. And Martha will find you. She'll notice from a distance and say, "Wow, you must not have anything to do because you're obviously got a lot of time on your hands," and she will feel the freedom to pass off some of her to-do list on you. Try it. Take a Sabbath day, one day a week, and rest, and pray, and play, and renew, and do things that give your soul and body life. Do that for a while, and Martha will find you, and she will see that, and she will take it as surefire evidence that you are immature, that you need to shore up your work ethic, that you are just using religious jargon to justify a really childish way of life. Try it for a while. Exhibit peace and trust whenever conversations about politics and morality come up. Say things like, "I know that God's in control." And Martha will be convinced that you're uninformed, that it's her job to tell you all the reasons that you should be as freaked out about the world as she is. She'll just think you're ignorant. Try it for a while. Live a life of peace and pace instead of worry and hurry. And everyone around you will tell you to get with the program. Chop, chop, don't let the grass grow under your feet. You need a little bit more gumption and ambition. Martha, even well-meaning, will try to recruit you into her chaos. Don't go. There's a movie that came out in 1996. Some of you were not alive. 1996, it was called Twister. Anybody see it? There's a movie about storms, and the main characters, Bill and Joe Harding, they were storm chasers, and they found themselves in some really amazing and dangerous storm situations. At the very end of the story, they're running from the mother of all tornadoes. It's an F5. It's just this huge, massive black cloud that was tearing up farmland by the acre and was whirling and humming at this horrible pace and sound. And so they end up on foot running from this tornado. And they run into this old farm area, and they're trying to find some place to hide because they cannot outrun this huge whirlwind of tornado. They end up going into this little wooden shack, just a really ratty little shack, but they find a pipe system that was buried deep into the ground. So they took a leather strap as the hurricane or as the tornado was coming. They strapped themselves down to this really deep pipe and then hung on for dear life. Well, within seconds, the entire shack is just blown away into splinters, and then within minutes, they're dangling, their feet are up in the air, and they're just... I practiced this last night to see if I could actually get both feet in the air. Not going to happen. And they're just dangling, and then everything's swirling around, and they're looking at this massive, super massive storm, and it passes by, and it blows away, and they are still right there. They're tethered down because they were connected to something that was deep. I know the gravitational pull that anxiety and the world of Martha's has on us. It's strong. And it's not ours to go try to fight with it. It's ours to strap into the one thing and just stay grounded. Simple challenge for you this week, for each one of us. Spend 15 minutes a day alone with Jesus. Early in the day, whenever you start your day, just spend 15 minutes a day alone with Jesus. It's not everything, it won't solve everything, but it starts with one thing. And that one thing affects everything. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for just a moment. I'd like to pray with you. As we go to prayer, if you are going to take me up on the challenge 15 minutes a day every day this week, just raise your hand, let me see it. You put your hand down. If you're sitting here this morning and you've never actually made Jesus your one thing, if this is kind of a new concept for you, and Jesus has been one of many things, he doesn't want to be one of many things in your life. He wants to be your Lord, your Savior. That's why we talk about coming to Jesus in surrender, because he's Lord. He requires everything, and he gives us everything. He forgives us. He makes us clean. He gives us life in God, but we have to come humble and give our life to him. If there's somebody here, and there usually is, who wants to take that step of surrendering your life to Jesus this morning, I just want to lead you in a prayer. You can say quietly what I'm saying out loud. Jesus, I want you to be my one thing. Today's the day. I'm going to give my life to you. Please forgive me for my wrongs, my sins. I don't want to keep being distracted by 1,000 things in life. I want you to be my number one. I believe in you. I want to live for you now and forever. Amen. Still in an attitude of prayer. If you prayed that, would you just show me and slip up your hand so I can see? If there's somebody here this morning and God has been poking at your heart and saying, you know, I used to be your one thing. You used to love me with a passion that was just fiery. You used to spend time with me and focus energy on me. But lately, I've gotten sidebarred so far that I don't even know where I fit. If you know that's you. And this morning, Christ is calling you back to say, hey, it doesn't take a whole lot of time. You can begin refocusing. It's actually quite simple. Focus your heart back on me. Invite me back to the one spot. If you sense God is nudging you to do that this morning, would you let me know and raise your hand and I'll pray with you? Okay, let's pray together. I'll pray it out loud. You can pray in your heart. Jesus, I just want to focus on you again. I want my life to be about you, not these other things. They all have to get done. That's all important stuff, but that's not where life comes from. please lead me as I sit and I be with you and I listen to you and I just renew my commitment as your disciple today. It's as simple as that. Christ, all over the room, I know you're speaking to us differently, but you're actually drawing us to the same point. This religion stuff is not infinitely complex. It's not about all the things that we can't do. It begins and it sustains its life by just looking at you and saying, Jesus, you're the most important one in my life. You're what life is about. And every circumstance that hits, I'm going to interpret it through what you say in your word. And every difficulty and valley that I go through, God, we're going to go through it together because you're my one constant, my consistent thing. And life will pull me in 1,000 directions. But I'm going to anchor to you. Jesus, be that kind of anchor for us this morning. Amen. Would you stand and sing as we close? You know, my real hope for this series and this fall for us is that for all the complex things that you're dealing with, we could just begin to focus on one simple thing, and that simple thing would make a world of difference for us. I'm hoping that for me as much as for you. In the upcoming weeks, we'll talk about what happens with the rest of the stuff of our lives as Jesus begins to be focused again as the one thing. We'll talk about some practical application ways of daily keeping our minds in a frame of peace, and how to focus on the one thing through some of the highest and lowest valleys and hills of our lives when we're most likely to get distracted. But I hope the result is the same for each of us, that we focus on Jesus in a new way. It's simple, and that he becomes again the dominant force in your life. I want to remind you, if you came in late, I just want to reiterate the gifts that we have for you. If you're a very first-time guest with us, please take your communication card, fill out whatever information you want, take to the table right on the other side of the wall. We have a gift for you. If you're a very first-time guest, we also have some gifts bags that are for college student, exploring Christianity, single mom, and what was the other one? Family night. Yeah, family night. So there's some fun ones there. Please, just if it's your very first time, we want to save those gifts for those guests. If we have not met, or if you brought a guest, I would love to meet him. Just come up and say hi. I'll hang out a few minutes afterwards and would love to meet you. Feel free to bring somebody along next week. We love having people here for the first time. And now, as you go, may the love of God, the peace of Jesus Christ, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you. You are sent.